our message. I thought, since so much has happened since we last met a month ago, fill you in on a few extra things, but not too many, because otherwise we'd need another message to go through all that. Just a few highlights. It seems that, as we see on this slide, when we studied the coming Islamic invasion of Israel, it seems to be the way things are happening, that not only do we have Central Asia as part of Magog, Ukraine is also going to be part of Magog. So we see stage setting happening for this coalition coming together. Not that we're in the tribulation or anything yet, because we believe that this invasion will not actually occur until after the rapture of the church, because it's this destruction of this coalition by the Lord on the mountains of Israel that will bring about one of the many things that brings about the Jews recognising Jesus as their Messiah. Another thing, going back to our original map, we see down there that I've circled in blue, we see Saudi Arabia. This comes in because we have in Ezekiel 38:13, where it says Sheba and Dedan. Sheba and Dedan are Saudi Arabia now. Will say to you, it's almost like happening today, a bit of weak protest against invasion. Have you come to capture spoils? Have you assembled your contingent to seize plunder, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, to capture great spoils? But the interesting thing is that Saudi Arabia, even though Saudi Arabia is that Sheba and Dedan, one of the many making that protest, we see they certainly don't like this invasion, especially the way Iran is going. So they're joining in military exercises now with Israel. It's on that slide, yeah. As we see there, there's that fan in the way, isn't it? Put that down here. Oops. Yeah. As we see in the slide, just an extract there, Israel to join massive US-led naval exercise in the Red Sea for the first time participants in the Fifth Fleet drill, including countries with which Israel has no formal ties, like Saudi Arabia. Israel Defence Force says this drill would advance our regional cooperation. And of course that's as late as 31st of January this year. And of course the same thing we see here. Excuse me. Defence Minister, I won't try to pronounce all their names, Benny Gantz, and that other Minister of Defence Affairs. We see them here shaking hands after signing a memorandum of understanding at the Bahraini Defence Headquarters on February the 3rd, 2022. And if you don't know where Bahrain is, it's an Arabic state also, essentially comprised of about 30 islands, including the largest one, which is the Bahrain Island. And it's situated between Qatar and the northern eastern coast of Saudi Arabia. So you see all this stage setting taking place. Now, one of these days we'll teach this psalm, but when all these things are happening, everyone comes out of the woodwork. And one of these things, of course, some say, talk about Psalm 83. Now, Psalm 83, as some people say, don't follow this line of thought, but Psalm 83 say that it talks about these 10 nations around Israel, and those who believe in Psalm 83 say that Israel will defeat these nations and become a superpower of the Middle East. And of course we don't believe any of that. As I've got down the bottom there, the evidence, we'll teach Psalm 83 another time. the evidence that Psalm 83 is actually prophesying a coming battle, and that this battle prepares the world for Gog-Magog battle is very weak. It is best to view it as a lament psalm, which asks the Lord to intervene and to deliver them from difficult situations, which he ultimately will do. Psalm 83 does not use typical prophetic language that we find in the book of Ezekiel. So much for the time being on that. Another time we might delve into that a little bit further. And so to get just a prophetic overview that we see on this slide. As I said, one of these days, Chris couldn't help me here. We need to enlarge these slides to fill the whole screen. But anyway, on this little one I can read without getting my pointer out. We see there the present church age, which we're now in. And of course, imminent. We have the rapture of the church. Jesus returns in the air to take us to be with him. Now again, some scholars do not believe that there may be a gap, but whenever there's a change in a dispensation, there often is a gap. We know the church did not start until 50 days or so after the death and resurrection of Christ. We know, even though it's not shown on this slide, that the end of the tribulation, we are told this one, there's also a 75-day gap where we have the judgment of the various nations before the Lord sets up the millennial kingdom. So it seems to me, even though there's no scripture I can point to, that there will be some preparation, because after all, when the rapture occurs, there's going to be chaos, and some order has to be restored. How long that takes, we don't know. And when it is, the Antichrist, which will not going to be revealed until after rapture, he will sign this peace treaty with Israel, and that's what kicks off the tribulation, which is a 7-year period, which you know from the, as it's sometimes referred to there, Daniel's 70th week, also referred to as the time of Jacob's trouble, and also referred to as the day of the Lord's wrath. And halfway through these 7 years, because when we were studying the Gog-Magog battle, those coalition of nations will be destroyed on the mountains of Israel, and but it's a supernatural destruction from the Lord, and I'm assuming the Antichrist may be one that may take some credit for that, and so he will then of course set himself up halfway through this tribulation as the God. He takes over the temple, which of course is yet to be built also. And of course, we have the last 3.5 years, which becomes the greatest anti-Semitism period that we know of. That's why it's called the time of Jacob's trouble. But as we've also studied, the Jews will eventually have learnt their lesson. They will call upon the Lord as he instructs them to do. As he said, you won't see me again until you call upon my name, which they do. So he returns. And of course, we have the Armageddon campaign, which destroys a lot of these armies. We have the 75-day interval where other judgments take place. Then we have the millennial reign. This is the kingdom. And the kingdom extends into eternity. So it's 1,000 years, then all the way into eternity. So that's a little bit of overview of end times program. And of course we are looking at, in this end times program, the fact that Babylon may be rebuilt, not in its glory of course, and it will become the headquarters of the Antichrist. And so I'm presenting to you, as we did last time, an alternate view. Because there's several views about Babylon. I've just listed a few here. We're concentrating on a different one. Some people say it's just an evil world system. Other people say they identify Babylon with Jerusalem. So these are people who think Babylon's is a code word. They say it's Jerusalem. The people who adopt that view, these are the preterists. Preter means past. These are people who think that all this has already been fulfilled when the Jewish temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Then we have those who say it's code for Rome. And then, of course, the one we're looking at is that it's a literal rebuilt city, because after all, Babylon is used 300 times in the Bible, and every time it's used, it's Babylon, while all of a sudden when we get to Revelation, it's not Babylon anymore, it's Rome. So we're still saying Babylon means Babylon, just as Israel means Israel, Jerusalem means Jerusalem, and so on. And then, of course, we have Babylon is the Roman Catholic Church, another popular view. And this popular view is, it came about in the days of the Reformation, when men like John Calvin and Martin Luther, they were taking a stand against Roman Catholicism. And that's a view that continues to be held today also. And we read one of Luther's quotes: "No man can believe what an abomination the papacy is. A Christian does not have to be of low intelligence either to recognise it. God himself must deride him in the hellish fire. And our Lord Jesus Christ," St. Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 8, "will slay him with the breath of his mouth and destroy him by his glorious coming. I only deride with my own weak derision, so that those who now live and those who will come after us should know what I have thought of the Pope, the damned Antichrist, and so that whoever wishes to be a Christian may be warned against such an abomination." So that's where we have this popular theory about it being the Roman Catholic Church. But this study, of course, we're taking the view that Babylon means Babylon, and a lot of expositors over the years have held that view. This is only a partial list. We got B.W. Newton in 1853, Robert Govert, G.H. Pembler, G.A. Cease, I suppose, or so, Clarence Larkin, popular organ, Arthur Pink, E.W. Bullinger, William Newell, F.C. Jennings, David Cooper, G.H. Lang, some popular ones that I like, Charles Dyer, and over on the other side, we probably didn't show up the colour so much there, but on the other slide we have Henry Morris, The Revelation Record, a book written in 1980. March Hitchcock, very excellent study if you can grab hold of it. It's called The End. Charles Dyer, and I was talking to Chris the other night. I don't order things online, but if anyone wants to order me a couple of these books, I'd be appreciated. I'll pay you for it. I wouldn't mind getting a copy of Charles Dyer's Future Babylon. That'd be a good one to read. 2017. Ron Rhodes, New Babylon Rising. Another good one just released, only 2021. That's just recent, and that's Babylon. So we have all those scholars there and many more that interpret Babylon in a literal sense. But when we interpret Babylon in a literal sense, it's a question of timing and faith, because as we read, the same thing happened when people suggested that Israel was going to become a nation again. Some people said, it's not possible. So I have a quote here. "The current situation in regard to the literal city of Babylon reminds us of the position of many earlier interpreters concerning the prediction of the Old Testament in regard to Israel. Prior to her re-establishment in 1948, it was difficult for many to believe that unfulfilled passages concerning a people who had been dispersed for nearly 2,000 years could ever be taken in a literal fashion as pertaining to a physical nation yet future." Because we now know it is a reality. Just like we're saying Babylon is going to be restored, it's yet future. Some people probably don't think it's a reality, just as they didn't think Israel was going to be a reality. Today we're thrilled to read these interpreters who held to a literal understanding of Israel over the many years when Israel seemed but a dusty recollection of history. May we be found among a similar cadre of interpreters in our own time concerning the city of Babylon. Well, there are a number of passages that tell us about this. We've already looked at one, and that's Zechariah 5 through 11. There is Isaiah 13 and Isaiah 14. There's Jeremiah 50 and 51. And the one we're studying is Revelation 17 and 18. Now, Isaiah 13 we'll look at tonight in our introduction to Revelation 17 again, and a little bit of Isaiah 14. And next time we'll look at Jeremiah 50 and 51 and then continue with our study of Revelation 17. And of course, Revelation 17 and 18, we had that future statement in Revelation 16:19, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. And that's referring to the destruction of Babylon. And so that's what we'll be looking at in some of these prophecies from Isaiah, Jeremiah, done Zechariah, and we're delving into Revelation 17 and 18. Isaiah has a number of oracles, a number of prophecies against the nations. I'm not going to read them all there. I've just highlighted the ones that I'm concerned about, and that is he starts off this narrative, these prophecies. He starts them off by talking about Babylon twice. Babylon in chapter 13, verses 1 through 14, all the way through to chapter 14:23, and then again we see he mentions Babylon again in chapter 21, verses 1 through 10. So Isaiah begins these series of messages on Babylon and spends more time on Babylon than on any other of these nations that he's making these prophecies about. So he's got two separate messages on Babylon, predicting two falls of Babylon. One was in the time of Daniel chapter 5, when the Persians overtook the city in 539 BC, and Isaiah 21 speaks a little bit about that. Tonight we're looking at Isaiah 13 and a little bit of Isaiah 14, because it's going to talk about a future timing of Babylon's destruction. And if Babylon is to be destroyed, occurred in the way Isaiah talks about it, and we don't interpret it in a spiritual sense, but in a literal sense, then it only stands to reason that Babylon has to come back to life, as it were, again. And so we'll fast track through this overview. We'll be looking at the day of the Lord in Isaiah 13, 6 through 9, the cosmic disturbances. Haven't seen Babylon destroyed yet, with cosmic disturbances. The global judgment in Isaiah 13, 11 and 12, compared to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which has never happened because those two cities were destroyed quickly, finally. Hasn't happened with Babylon, but it will in the tribulation. Complete and final desolation. And a little bit we'll talk about universal peace and rest, which is the millennial reign of Jesus Christ, and Israel's regeneration. We talked a little bit about that when we were studying Ezekiel 38 and 39. So there's a little bit of an outline of where we are going. So first of all, Isaiah 13 equates Babylon's destruction to the day of the Lord. And so we read in verse 6, while you. And while you emphasizes a violent lamentation. The entire world will be full of horrifying sounds, as we've seen in the seal, trumpet and bowl judgments in Revelation that we've been studying. So the entire world will be full of horrifying sounds during the tribulation. Sadly though, as we've seen in our past studies of Revelation, few people lamenting this death and destruction, few people will turn to God, and they will continue to reject him. It says, for the day of the Lord is at hand, it shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. Now, the day of the Lord can refer to any time in history. In the Old Testament, sometimes it refers to a day when the Lord brings temporal judgment upon a nation, a judgment in time. But in these verses here, Isaiah is using it in an eschatological sense. And so what we see in this slide here, we see again, we have Daniel's 9, which talks about the 70 weeks, of which we've had 7 plus 62, that's 69, 1 week to go. That's the 7 years of tribulation. But it didn't happen straight away because we have what... just don't think of the verse. Anyway, what we have is an intercalation, is probably the word I was thinking of, an insert of another dispensation, and that is the church age. And of course, one of these days, when this age is over and done with, there will be the exit resurrection from the church, and then we have the tribulation again, Daniel's 70th week, and halfway through that, we have again the statue of the Antichrist goes up in the temple, and then we have the millennial reign, and then we have the new heavens and the new earth. And as you can see on the diagram there, the day of the Lord is not a literal day, because it can refer either to the 7 years of tribulation, or it could refer to that moment in time when Jesus Christ returns. It can refer to the 1,000 years of the millennium, and also into, the first view of the day of the Lord is in a bad sense, all those destructions that take place. The day of the Lord, we see in a good sense when we get into the new heavens and the new earth. And say, hey, how you going there? Good to see you. Yeah. And so the day of the Lord. So we see that Isaiah then is using it in this eschatological sense. So the judgment of Babylon that we're looking at as being identified here as being at the end of the tribulation period when Babylon itself will be destroyed. So we're looking at it as a future judgment. And of course the result is that the people will be absolutely terrified during this time. If you've been studying Revelation long enough, especially if you think of Revelation chapter 9, when the demons will come out of the abyss. So the result is people will be absolutely terrified during this time. And Isaiah 13:7 says, "Therefore shall all hands be feeble, and every man's heart shall melt." So people will be paralysed with fear. I think there's one verse in Revelation, they'll try to hide themselves in the caves and in the rocks because they know where this judgment's coming from, in spite of the fact that their hearts are hardened, and most will still not believe. And so we also read in Isaiah 13:8, "And they shall be afraid." Who wouldn't be? Glad we're not going to be in the tribulation. "And they shall be afraid. Pangs and sorrow shall take hold of them. They shall be in pain as a woman that travails. They shall be amazed one at another. Their faces shall be as flames." So people are going to be in shock over what's happening around them, what's happening to them. And of course they will be embarrassed because of the fears that they are feeling. That is, their faces will be as flames. Verse 9 of Isaiah goes on to say, again, mentioning the day of the Lord, "Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, both with wrath and fierce anger," not just anger, fierce anger, "to lay the land desolate," because those seal, trumpet and bowl judgments will more or less literally do that, because mankind is beginning to worship creation rather than worship the Creator. All those judgments are going to destroy a lot of creation itself. "And he shall destroy its sinners out of it." Now, when you read verses like that, many people want to say, how can a loving God do this? They want to accuse him as being a murderous tyrant because they read verses like this one in Isaiah and many other passages. However, we know that man has a sin nature, And it's because of that nature, he's in continual rebellion against God. And sometimes we need evangelism through a crisis. Our government sometimes manages through a crisis. Well, God's going to evangelize through a crisis. And so God has a plan to eradicate sin from the world, and that plan involves destroying that which refuses, those who refuse to turn from their evil ways, including those who refuse to repent. And the only time in history where such wrath, such fury came upon the planet was, of course, during the flood. And so we're going to have these judgments taking place during this tribulation. Well, Isaiah 13 equates Babylon's destruction to cosmic disturbances. And we see that in Isaiah 13, 10 and 13. And Isaiah 13, 10 through 13, we'll just read a couple of verses there. They predict that we have these cosmological disturbances, and they're going to take place when Babylon falls. And this didn't take place in 539 BC. And so we read in Isaiah 13:10, "For the stars of heaven and its constellations shall not give their light, the sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine." Verse 13, "Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall move out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger." So we have these astrophysical disasters also taking place, never seen before. And this sort of vocab that Isaiah is using is very similar to what the Lord himself uses in talking about these end time scenarios, something that was yet future. He talks about them as specifically in the Olivet Discourse. For example, one passage there, well, we're not going to read all those, 29 through 31, but reading 24, 29, the Lord says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give its light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken." Very similar to what Isaiah was predicting would happen, yet future, and still future. Isaiah 13, he also continues, he equates Babylon's destruction to judgment of the world itself in Isaiah 13, 11 and 12. So it's going to be a time of worldwide punishment. And Isaiah 13, 11 says, notice all the I wills here, "I will punish the world for their evil, the wicked for their iniquity. I will cause the arrogance of the proud to cease. I will lay low the haughtiness of the ruthless." And this destruction that he's talking about there, again, it's on those who have rejected God, who have placed their faith in themselves, thinking themselves to be their own God, or worshipping the Antichrist, who's going to set himself up halfway through the tribulation in the statue to be worshipped. So these judgments are coming upon also the empire of the Antichrist himself as well. So this judgment that Isaiah is talking about is not just localized to the kingdom of Babylon, yet to be established, but it also extends around because so many people will have that sin of pride, that sin of arrogance or haughtiness, and so so much destruction will be brought upon the world that Isaiah says, "I will make a man more rare than fine gold." And because we do see in the book of Revelation, when the sixth seal, when the fourth seal is open, haven't got the whole verse there, just the part that I'm interested in. "And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on it was Death, and Hades followed," because that's where some of these people will go. They'll go into the remand centre called Hades. So Hades follows death. And Hades followed with him, and power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and with living creatures of the earth. So not only do we have, I don't know how many people will disappear when the rapture takes place. I don't know how much of the world will disappear. But when these judgments come into play, a quarter will go in the fourth seal judgment. And then when you get to the 4 angels that are loosed from beneath the Euphrates River, they are given the power to slay a third part of man. So you have another third part of the human population is going to be wiped out as well there. And then, of course, you have all those that are going to die during the other seal, trumpet, and bowl judgments. So by the time you get to the Armageddon campaign, I don't know how much is going to be left, but whatever's left, we've studied that so far, they'll be brought into the Valley of Decision, into the plains of Megiddo, and that's where the Lord will return and destroy those armies as well and set up his millennial kingdom. So countless numbers, in other words, are going to perish with all these judgments that are going to befall upon the earth. Isaiah 13:19, getting back to the referencing Babylon, Isaiah says, "In Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldeans' pride shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah." Has never happened yet. That's never been destroyed violently, immediately, as were the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Ancient Babylon actually gradually declined and never experienced a sudden, fatal, cataclysmic destruction as happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. The fact the city of Babylon was captured, The city of Babylon was actually captured by Cyrus in 539 BC. There was no destruction of the city at that time. In fact, we have in, I think it might be in New York or somewhere, we have in one of those museums what is called the Cyrus cylinder, where the history of one of these things that have happened has been recorded. Looks something like that. That's the Cyrus cylinder. And inscribed in that Cyrus cylinder is some of the exploits of Cyrus in his taking over of Babylon. Some of it I have written here for you. I'll read a little bit more. This is some of the things inscribed on the cylinder. I'll read a little bit more. It says that when Cyrus overtook Babylon, he goes on to say, "Without any battle, sparing any calamity, I did not allow anybody to terrorize any place of the country. I strove for peace in Babylon and all his other sacred cities. I returned to those sacred cities on the other side of the Tigris, the sanctuaries of which have been in ruins for a long time, the images which used to live therein, and established for them permanent sanctuaries. I also gathered all their former inhabitants and returned to them all their habitations." In other words, no cataclysmic judgment, in other words. In fact, we have the writings of Herodotus, and he writes in his histories, and he's writing in 450 BC, he says this: "He," that is referring to Cyrus, "conducted the river by a channel," and you know how Babylon was overtaken, do you? They cut off the river, and they were able to walk through underneath. Yeah. He, Cyrus, conducted the river by a channel into the lake, and so he made the former course of the river passable by the sinking of the stream. When this had been done, the Persians, who had been posted for this very purpose, entered by the bed of the river Euphrates, into Babylon, the stream having sunk so far that it reached about to the middle of a man's thigh. Those Babylonians who dwelt in the middle did not know that they had been captured. They were taken by surprise, thought their city was impregnable, could never be entered, could never be taken over, but this is what happened. So not even a battle, as we see in some of these things that Isaiah is being predicting here about a yet future Babylon. And so we read what we see in Isaiah 13 and 14 doesn't seem to fit the known facts of history. No cataclysmic judgments, no upheavals, no war, certainly no seventh bowl judgment, all still yet future. And in fact, Isaiah goes even further. He makes pronouncements using specific images that will help define the extent of Babylon's destruction, which has not happened yet either. He says, "It shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation, neither shall the Arabian pitch his tent therein, neither shall the shepherds make their sheepfolds there." And of course, again, that cannot be said also of Babylon historically, because Babylon did not really diminish and almost to nothingness until about 1000 AD. In fact, we have when the rise of the Greek Empire in 331 BC, Alexander the Great was welcomed by the Babylonians when he entered the city, almost claimed him as their king after the victory over the Medes at Guangamala. And so we read, and of course, when he took Babylon, he ordered the restorations to be carried out. But of course, all that work ceased on Alexander the Great's death in 323 BC. And of course, when it said, as we read there, neither shall the Arabian pitch his tent there, neither shall the shepherds make their sheepfold there. As we said here, Isaiah 13:20 said, this is a prediction, nor will the Arab pitch his tent. What actually happened? Arabs have occupied sites within this ancient city. As we see here, the Arab tent home at Babylon in that area, 1899 to 1908, quoting that verse again. And so we see some nomads there living in their tents as they wander around this ancient city, what was left of it. So that prediction has not been fulfilled either. It is yet to still happen. And so the focus of Isaiah 13, as we've seen very quickly, has been on how God is going to judge Babylon. And Isaiah 14, the focus is on what happens after the destruction of Babylon. And after the destruction of Babylon, there will be final restoration of a united Israel, which of course hasn't happened yet either. This will happen in the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. So we read Isaiah 14, verse 1. When the Lord will have mercy on Jacob and again choose Israel and settle them in their own land. Settle them in their own land. And this is they haven't occupied the land that's been given to them ever. They will in the millennial kingdom. And the strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cling to the house of Jacob. So these strangers clinging to them are going to be Gentiles, because they would have become believers. I think Zechariah talks a little bit about that in one of his chapters, how they will more or less hang on to the coat of a Jew and follow him into Jerusalem so they can hear the voice of the Lord who's ruling and reigning from that city. So these strangers, they'll be clinging, they'll be the Gentiles, they'll become believers. So the Lord has mercy at that time when Babylon is destroyed, and there is a reunification of Israel in their own land. And he goes on to say, Isaiah, he says, the peoples will take them along and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel will possess them, that is the Gentiles, in the land of the Lord, for male servants and female servants, and they will take them captive, whose captive they were, and so things are going to be reversed, and they will rule over their oppressors. So this indicates the level of prosperity that the Jews will have in the millennial kingdom, a level of affluence that they will have, where the servants will be the Gentiles who will join them in this time of 1,000 years when the Lord will rule and reign. Now, nothing like that has ever happened. In 538 BC, when they began to return under Zerubbabel, or return under Ezra, or return under Nehemiah, It has never happened, and therefore it has to refer to some future event. So in these passages then, I'm going to give Terry a nudge there, he's going to sleep now. And too many resources for lunch. So Isaiah sees into the future where the people of Israel, they're going to be restored by God and rule over their oppressors, those who oppress them. And of course, there'll be a reversal, as it were, of the present situation we find themselves in, because as we've studied, this is the times of the Gentiles, where Gentiles more or less have control over what things happen in the Middle East most of the time. And verse 3 of Isaiah 14, and it shall come to pass in the day that the Lord shall give you rest from your sorrow and from your fear and from the hard bondage in which you were made to serve. So Israel will be restored to the land, all of it. And yes. Oh, and so this again is something that has never happened yet. So there's going to be this time of blessing when Israel is restored back in the Millennial Kingdom. So what Isaiah is saying here is that way down in the future, still future for us, because as we've seen on that timeline before, we've got to have the rapture, we've got to have a preparation period, no doubt, the rise of the Antichrist, signs a treaty, kicks off the tribulation, and at the end of the tribulation, the return of Jesus Christ, a 75-day interval, which we study from Daniel, where we have those other judgments of the nations, and then the 1,000 reign of Jesus Christ. So all this is clear, not only from these prophecies of Isaiah, also from Jeremiah 50 and 51, which we'll look at next time, and it goes far beyond what we've seen in the historic fall of Babylon in 539 BC. So John Welford says, as far as the historic fulfillment is concerned, it is obvious from both scripture and history that these verses, not only these verses we've just been looking at, but also Jeremiah 50 and 51, which we'll look at next time, have not been literally fulfilled. The city of Babylon continued to flourish after the Medes conquered it, Medes Persians, and though its glory dwindled, especially after the control of the Medes and the Persians ended in 323 BC, the city continued in some form or substance until AD 1000 and did not experience a sudden termination such as anticipated in this prophecy of Isaiah and Jeremiah, which we get to look at. And then Larkin says in his book on Revelation, and picking up the quote halfway through, and this is in exact harmony with the words of Isaiah 13:19, and Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees, excellency shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. And the prophet Jeremiah makes the same statement, Jeremiah 50, verse 40. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was not protracted through many centuries. Their glory disappeared in a few hours, Genesis 19, 24 through 28. And as ancient Babylon was not thus destroyed, the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah cannot be fulfilled unless there is to be a future Babylon that shall be thus destroyed. In Revelation 16, 17 through 19, we are told that Babylon shall be destroyed by an earthquake attended with most vivid and incessant lightning and awful thunder. And so that's an introduction to Revelation 17 from Isaiah. So we'll pick up Revelation 17 where we left off last time. And before we do, we see in Revelation 17, it's a parenthetical break because chapter 16 in Revelation is where you had the last bowl judgment and the destruction of Babylon. And that's when the angel bringing about some of those destructions says more or less the same thing that Jesus said on the cross, Tetelestai, it is finished, it is done, says in Revelation 16. And Then, of course, the earth is going to be reconfigured. That's the millennial kingdom and the millennial reign of Christ. That's where John picks it up again in Revelation 19 with the return of Jesus for his millennial reign. But Revelation 17 and 18 is a flashback. If Babylon is destroyed, John now fills in the details. And that's not the only time John does this. They're what we call the book of Revelation is chronological. But now and then John stops, says, I want to explain this in a little bit more detail. I better have a flashback here. Sometimes you see it in movies, they have a flashback. And so after the sixth seal judgment, John has a flashback to who are the 144,000 Jews. Then after the sixth trumpet judgment, John has a flashback to explain, look, there's not going to be any more delay, even though there may be another 3.5 or 4 years to go. But what's that compared to all eternity? No more delay. And he talks about the two witnesses that come on the scene. And he talks about the fact that when that, what alludes to, connects up with Matthew 24, when that abomination of desolation goes up in the temple, some of the Jews have to flee to Petra, hide in those caves there. Some have to stand and fight, as we saw in our study of Zechariah 14. So he talks about Israel's flight. And in that interlude, in that parenthetical insertion, John explains in Revelation 12 what's behind all this. Satan. In Revelation 12, there's war in heaven. Satan and his angels fight against Michael and his angels. Satan and his angels are cast down to the earth. And then it's Satan's last stand, as it were. He now knows, I've only got 3.5 years. This is halfway through the tribulation. 3.5 years to destroy the Jews. Because if he can destroy the Jews, he's won the battle. Because there's so many covenants that Jesus Christ has yet to fulfill, and they won't be fulfilled until the millennial reign. And that's when, therefore, he indwells the Antichrist, who's now set himself up to be God in the temple. After all, what did Lucifer say in Isaiah 14? I will be like the Most High God. And now he can have it. He's indwelt the Antichrist. The Antichrist has a statue of himself in the temple, and he wants you to worship him. Worship him to the point that it's like setting up again today, if you understand Revelation. He produces this, can't buy or sell unless you have my mark, the mark of the beast. And so he wants you to worship him. You worship me, and if you want to live, you take my mark. Otherwise you can't buy or sell. Starve to death if you're not martyred to death, as he will be killing off many people. You want to ask the question?
With that chapter on Isaiah, is that obviously it's talking about Babylon, but that's also what it's talking about there for the rest of the world as well, like all the other countries, the destruction, everything like that?
Well, some of those other prophecies that Isaiah made, some of them have been historically fulfilled, but not this prophecy to do with Babylon. As we noted there, Isaiah has two prophecies on Babylon. One to do with that was fulfilled in the takeover of Babylon by the Medes Persians. But the chapter we've been looking at is still yet future, as we've seen by all those, cosmological and astrophysical events taking place. So it's still yet future.
So during its destruction, the other countries and cities around the world, they'll probably be facing their great tribulation.
Oh, yeah, there'll be a lot of destruction taking place. I think Revelation 16, you can hardly even imagine. It says something like, every island shall be fled away. This is all starting to prepare it, changing the appearance of the planet, getting ready for the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. So there'll be a lot of physical changes taking place during these destructions. And so a lot of other nations will be facing these judgments as well. You've only got to look at the seal and the what do you call them? The trumpets, yeah, thanks, and the bowl judgments. Yeah, so much destruction will be taking place. You wonder if anyone is ever going to survive during those 7 years, but they will. Yeah, they will. But as we said in that passage in Isaiah, rare as gold, you know. So much destruction is taking place.
Sorry, one more question. With the timeline, when it talks about the return of Jesus with the rapture, like there's a bit of talk about, like with Isaiah and Revelations, there's linkages of basically scripture repeating itself, showing that it's how it's sort of going to happen. With the return of Jesus, like, because I know that there's some debate around coming from the sky, coming from the east, coming from, he's going to be here for 40 days. So it's just like, how do you, and then like false Christ.
No, those 40 days you're talking about, that's probably after his death, burial and resurrection. 40 days, and then Pentecost and the start of the church age, that's where that comes in. But there's two advents of Christ. Let's put it this way. There's the first advent, and when he comes onto the earth and lives for those 30 or so years and goes to the cross and dies for mankind, death, burial and resurrection. Then for 40 days after that, he makes all those resurrection appearances, and then he ascends into heaven. And of course, then he doesn't return in two stages. Phase one is the rapture. This is what we believe in. Some people, most people believe in the second advent. Some people question, well, when's the rapture going to be? So they believe in, is it before the tribulation? Is it halfway through the tribulation? Is it at the end of the tribulation, which doesn't make sense? And then there's a three-quarter wrath theory, which means 3/4 of the way through the tribulation will be taken out. So there's all these theories about when Jesus will return and take his people to be with him. But we'll have to do a study in the rapture at one time and talk about why we are pre-trib. That the only thing that fits is that we'll be taken out before the tribulation starts, because 2 Thessalonians talks about the fact that we'll not experience his wrath, and also Revelation 3:10, I think it is, talks about the fact that we will not be in here for the wrath, but the earth dwellers will experience the wrath still to come, which means the earth dwellers are sometimes a term in Revelation used for those who are hardened of heart, those who are going to be left behind on the planet. And of course, they'll have opportunity to believe in Christ, because you have 144,000 Jewish evangelists, you have their converts, you have the two witnesses, and then if that doesn't work, you have the angel with the everlasting gospel. So the Lord is merciful. He's not willing that any should perish. Those who do so by their own volition. And what happens to them? They go to be with the devil, because the Lord said in Matthew 24, the lake of fire was prepared for the devil and his angels. It was never prepared for mankind. But if we follow the policy of Satan, which is the policy of evil, then, well, you go be with him. Spend some time with him. He's your buddy. He's your buddy for all eternity. Yeah. I don't know if I've answered your question or not. So what we have here, where are we? Okay, so we're looking at this now, Revelation 17. This is a bit of review of what we did last time. First of all, we have the announcement of the harlot in verses 1 and 2. Can't go into all the same detail as we did last time. And it says, and there came one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls, these are the bowl judgments, and talked with me, that's John, saying unto me, come here, I will show unto you the judgment of the great harlot. That's the word porne. That sits upon, or better, the Greek can also mean sits by, because another verse in the same chapter says she's sitting upon the beast. So sitting by many waters. And many waters, it explains later on, the passage refers to the nations and so forth, peoples around the world, controlling them. So here we have Babylon introduced by one of these angels. Could be the angel that had the seventh bowl judgment, we don't know. Maybe in the very angel who was dispersed from heaven to carry out the judgment of God, resulting in the destruction of Babylon. And so, but why destroyed? Because Babylon, just as the temple of Israel is going to be rebuilt, Babylon in some form, we showed you some points towards that last time we were doing this, Babylon will have this universal effect on the entire world. It says in verse 2, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. That's porneo. Yeah, porne and porneo. Mention those two words because they both refer to not literal fornication. It's referring to unfaithfulness. A lot of unfaithfulness. As Jesus said, when I return, will I find people continue to be, well, the exact verse is, Kate probably knows it.
Just with faith.
Will we find faith on the earth? A lot of unfaithfulness. So with him, the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And so this is the result of religion during the tribulation. Well, the alliance of the harlot, which we know by the way, as you continue to read Revelation 17, is the city of Babylon. Tells us that. It says the woman is Babylon. And so he carried me away in the Spirit into the wilderness. This is the idea by means of the Spirit. It's the Holy Spirit who enables all of this to take place, because it's the Holy Spirit who is responsible for overseeing revelation. He reveals to us things that we never knew before. That's why later on he's going to say, a mystery, Babylon the Great. A mystery is a truth that's never been revealed in the past, but has now been revealed to us. So, and I saw a woman sitting upon a scarlet-coloured beast, that's the Antichrist, full of names of blasphemy. And we know from Daniel and from our study last time that this is antagonism towards God, disrespectful to God, and this beast is described as also having 7 heads and 10 horns. I'll explain that next time. But the interesting thing is that Revelation 12:3 describes Satan the same way. Revelation 12:3 says, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns. That means we know the power behind the throne of the Antichrist. It's Lucifer, Satan, who we know him as. So that's the real power behind the kingdom of the Antichrist. It's Satan. He's the one putting the ideas, destroy the Jews. The last 3.5 years, a great period of anti-Semitism that the world has ever known. And not only influencing the Antichrist, we haven't introduced him yet, well, we have in our previous studies of Revelation, because he has a sidekick, like Batman and Robin, I suppose. He has a sidekick called a prophet. The false prophet, that is. Now, this woman riding the beast, the world knows about it, even though they don't understand it. Because here we have a picture of it called Europa in front of Winston Churchill building. The woman riding the beast, they don't realise what it means. And then also we have this one, a pagan goddess Europa outside the European Union headquarters of Brussels. So Satan is having a field day. He's having these things put up. I suppose, if they only woke up, they opened my eyes, they realise, what's this woman riding the beast, and study Revelation, they might come to know what actually is going to go on. And so images of the woman on the beast. And then, of course, we have the clothing or the apparel of the woman, emphasising this excessive spiritual idolatry or spiritual unfaithfulness. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet colour and adorned with gold and precious stone and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Now, Daniel is the foundation. Revelation, if you like, is the ceiling. If you want us to understand Revelation, you go back to the foundation of Daniel. And Daniel has a little bit of this imagery because we have some of these writings that take place that the kings don't understand, and they bring in Daniel who can interpret these things. And it says, who will ever interpret these things shall be clothed with scarlet and have a chain of gold about his neck. So we know which city they're talking about again, because this is what happened in the city of Babylon. And so when we connect all these, we connect the dots, as Dean says on that, whatever. We connect the dots, we get the right images together. We know that this is talking about the city of Nebuchadnezzar that he ruled and reigned over. And of course, ancient Babylon is going to be modern day Iraq. When you looked at those slides at the start, in the alliance that comes against Israel. You don't see Iraq mentioned there. Why not? Because it's spared, because that's where Babylon is going to be rebuilt, where Babylon is going to be re-established as the headquarters of the Antichrist. And so this imagery, arrayed in purple and scarlet colour, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, again emphasising the influence that this religious system is going to lure people away in the tribulation. Yes.
It talks about a woman, right? So a woman in prophecy is often talking about the religion. So this is Babylon, where this false religion is.
It doesn't always refer to woman, because we have the bride.
Oh yes.
Referring to Jerusalem. Yeah, it's going to talk about that in Revelation 19.
Babylon's talking about the false religion.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that's the base of it.
Yeah. Like in Revelation 2 or something, it talked about Jezebel.
Yes.
Reintroduced Jezebel again, the false religion that was taking place in those cities. Yeah. Used the name of that woman.
Yeah.
I don't want to blame women, of course, but he took the fruit off the tree. Move on. Also in this imagery, you see the woman holding the golden cup. That also goes back to Daniel as well, because we see how Belshazzar took the golden vessels and golden cups that he took out of the temple, and it was drinking from them when that finger started writing on the wall. So the golden cup imagery also takes us back to the city of Babylon as well. And so we start connecting all these dots. We come to her name. We'll start to finish up with this, everyone, because we've been going for quite a while here. And her name. And upon her forehead was a name written. Now we're going to change the translation a little bit, but we'll put this as it is up here. Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. So you notice this woman, which is the city of Babylon, is also called a harlot, and her title is the mother of harlots. Now a mother has offspring, and the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth, this is looking at the original source of all spiritual idolatry, the original source of all religion, and it wasn't Rome. It goes all the way back to Babylon, the Tower of Babel, and Nimrod. So it takes us all, that description takes us all the way back to where it began. Where it began is where it's going to end, and way back and there. So the mother of all harlots. It's interesting, we hear this word virus mentioned so often. Well, Clarence Larkin used it in describing this false religion in one of his comments. He says, the river Euphrates, on which the city of Babylon was built, was one of the four branches into which the river that flowed through the Garden of Eden was divided. And Satan doubtless chose the site of Babylon as his headquarters, from which to sally forth to tempt Adam and Eve. It was doubtless here that the antediluvian apostasy had its source that ended in the flood. To this centre, the forces of evil gravitated, because they were dispersed. So this evil went all the way around the world. To this centre, the forces of evil gravitated after the flood, and Babel was the result. And of course, what happened was the Lord confused them in the languages. Yeah. This was the origin of the nations, but the nations were not scattered abroad over the earth until Satan had implanted in them the virus of a doctrine that has been the source of every false religion the world has ever known. That's where it all began, and where it began, that is where it's going to end. Babylon the Great. Babylon the Great. You want to take a picture of that, please? Babylon the Great. Babylon the Great. It's mentioned so many times. Revelation 14:8. Babylon is fallen, that great city. Revelation 16:19. Great Babylon came in remembrance before God. Revelation 17:5. Babylon the Great. Revelation 18:2. Babylon the Great is fallen. Babylon is not Rome. So that means Babylon has to reborn in some form or another. And we showed you those 3 temples going up at the moment in Iraq. One towards the Jews, one towards the Muslims, and one towards the Christians. Yeah. Revelation 18:10, the great city of Babylon. Revelation 18:21, the great city of Babylon shall be found no more at all. Now, in the NASB, in the ESV, that's the extended English Standard Version, right? In the ESV, in the NLT, in the NET, in the NIV, mystery is not in capital letters. And that's why I think this translation we find in the King James is not quite correct. In fact, Arthur Pink said, "We believe that the English translators have misled many by printing on their own authority the word mystery in large capital letters, thus making it appear that this was a part of the woman's name. This we are assured is a mistake. That the mystery is connected with the woman herself and not with her name is clear from Revelation 17:7, where the angel will explain to John, I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast which carries her. And of course that's what we'll go on to see is going to happen. So some of the most translations on the top part of the screen, the translation of the NASB, New American Standard Bible, and upon her forehead a name was written, a mystery. What's the mystery? Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And as Revelation 17:7 we'll look at next time when we continue, I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast which carries her. So the mystery is the woman, Babylon, and the mystery is also tied up with the Antichrist, the beast. This is how one person explains it, if you can sort of get this in your head, and this is what we'll finish with. We'll finish with this quote. One person says, what is a mystery? Not a novel, a mystery novel. A mystery is a new truth. He says, here's the mystery. You have in the Bible 2 strands of prophetic truth developing. They're developing from Genesis to Revelation. You have the coming forth of the Antichrist in his one world system, a 10-nation confederacy. But then you have other passages like Isaiah 13 and 14, Jeremiah 50 and 51, Zechariah 5 through 11, which also tell that Babylon is destined to play some sort of prophetic role in the end times. So you've got 2 trains, this is what this author's saying, you've got 2 trains on the same track. They're about ready to collide with each other. So how is the tension resolved? The answer is in chapter 17, where the woman rides the beast. The woman, or Babylon, gets supremacy in some sense over the beast. The beast, as we'll see when we continue studying Revelation 17, the beast and his allies are going to be like that, and they are going to aren't going to like that, and they're going to turn violently on Babylon, because God has put into their hearts, that's at the last few verses of Revelation 17, and God will put into their hearts of the beast and his allies to do this, and that's how Babylon is destroyed. That is the mystery, which we will see unfold in Revelation 17 and Revelation 18. And that's what you're all exhausted. That's what we'll continue with next time. So we'll close with a song, and we'll leave it there until we can. What?